Ever since Christopher Columbus landed on American soil, our shores have beckoned all who seek freedom. Our founding fathers knew that their ancestors had left all their possessions and comforts in England, following in Columbus's footsteps, because they shared his conviction that God had given this land so he could do a new work in freedom. The Pilgrims and Puritans shared their stories of God's faithfulness in bringing them to America with all the generations that followed. As the great Puritan leader John Winthrop stated in 1630, as he surveyed his new home in Massachusetts Bay Colony, "We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies. For we must consider that we shall be as a city on a hill." 145 years later, these prophetic words came true for his descendants. On April 19, 1775, the men and boys of Lexington turned out on the churchyard and recalled the words of Winthrop, that 10 of them would resist 1,000 enemies. As they faced the greatest military in the world, these farmers stood with hunting rifles in hand and told the king and his thousands of British soldiers, "You can't have our guns and ammunition." Our founding fathers recalled John Winthrop's prophecy of America being a city on a hill. They knew this land had been given to them for a new creation and liberty. It was finally achieved through the blood of patriots and prayers of the people. General George Washington knew the prayers of his ancestors, and so he turned to God and asked for help and protection. The Lord answered that prayer in 1,000 different ways through his long battle with Britain. God protected Washington and his army with the capture of British spy Major John Andre. 3 New York militiamen captured Andre, who had placed in his shoe the plans from Benedict Arnold to overthrow West Point. Washington didn't wait around for an ACLU lawyer to twist the law into so many knots that the enemy got off on a technicality. He honored the militiamen for their service. He got the information he needed from the enemy, and then he promptly hung him. I wonder what Washington would do about Gitmo. We can be proud of the role other New Yorkers played in the struggle for freedom. In the winter of 1776, Colonel Henry Knox needed help bringing the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston to break the British blockade of the city. Upstate farmers with teams of oxen left their duties at home and traveled over the snow-covered Adirondack Mountains to help haul the cannon all the way to Boston. Their efforts paid off on the morning of March 5th when the British saw all those cannons staring down at them from Dorchester Heights. They hightailed it out of the harbor. And just down the road, on August 6, 1776, 800 New York militiamen and 40 Oneida Indian allies fought in what has been called the bloodiest battle of the Revolution, the Battle of Oriskany. Fort Stanwix had called for reinforcements during a siege by the British. The Tryon County militia, headed by General Nicholas Herkimer, responded. As these brave men were marching through the wilderness, they were ambushed by the British and their Mohawk allies. Hardly any family in the Mohawk Valley escaped the battle unscathed, and some families lost all male members. General Herkimer himself died shortly after the battle from a bullet wound received in the leg. But even so, General Herkimer and the militia were able to hold their ground until reinforcements arrived. The Patriots' action that day delayed the British plans to cut New York off from the rest of the colonies. I believe the spirit of those New Yorkers is still alive and well here today. And we won't let their sacrifice be forgotten. On a recent trip to Boston, I saw a small glass bottle full of tea leaves. They belonged to a man named Thomas Melville. He may be known by his famous grandson, Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, but I will always remember him as a true patriot. As a young man, Thomas stood up and was counted on December 16, 1773. That was the night of the Boston Tea Party. When Thomas came home from his night of partying and took his boots off, he found they were full of tea. Seeing it made me more ready to throw overboard all our representatives who have imposed taxation without representation. Just as the men who showed up to toss tea into the Boston Harbor were considered a small band of rebels by the government, we're being looked at in the same way. King George believed that the rebels would soon quiet down, go home, continue paying their taxes, and things would go back to normal. Things never went back to normal. A shot was heard on April 15th, 2009, when the first round of tea parties took place, and every state house in America heard it. But most importantly, Washington, D.C. heard it. We have a man sitting in the Oval Office who would like to be king, but I've got news for him. Things are not going back to normal. The spirit of '76 has been reawakened, and we want our freedom back. We can be thankful and proud of all the great Americans who have gone before us and given us this great nation, a nation that from its earliest beginnings was founded for freedom, a nation that has given a new life to millions who have landed on its shores. As our founding father, John Adams, said about the signing of the Declaration of Independence, this day will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as a day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be celebrated with pomp and parades, shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward forevermore. Let us take Adam's advice and celebrate our nation's founding and how thankful we are for it. And let us not grow weary. Let's continue fighting to keep our nation a shining city on a hill. I just want to say God bless y'all and happy birthday, America.